racist mother kicks a black girl off the playground, humiliating her in front of everyone. But when the girl's father appears, the situation changes. He decides not to leave it without consequences and is ready to show that such actions will not pass without a trace. Now, not only the guard, but the whole city will have to answer for injustice. Subscribe to the channel and leave a comment. Where are you watching us? A gentle morning breeze swept through the park as the sun cast its warm glow across the playground. It was one of those serene weekend mornings that Darius cherished, a chance to step away from the weight of courtroom decisions and enjoy the simple joys of fatherhood. His daughter, Jada, skipped eagerly beside him, her hand wrapped around his as they made their way toward the playground they often visited. Jada's smile was infectious. She lived for moments like these, where she could run, swing, climb, and play freely with other kids. Darius admired her spirit, hoping that the world would never dim that light. But as a judge, he was all too familiar with how often society found ways to do exactly that. Today felt different, though. The weather was perfect, the park filled with the cheerful sounds of children playing and parents chatting. Jada's eyes sparkled as they approached the playground. Without a second thought, she dashed toward the swings, her favorite part of the park, leaving Darius smiling softly as he found a nearby bench to sit and observe. Jada quickly immersed herself in the playground's bustling energy. She swung high on the swing set, then climbed up the jungle gym, exchanging excited chatter with the other children. Her laughter mixed with theirs, a delightful melody of youthful joy. For Darius, watching her enjoy herself like this was a kind of therapy, a reminder of the pure and beautiful things life still had to offer. But peace can be fleeting. Darius noticed a white woman standing off to the side, her gaze locked onto Jada with a disapproving expression. She seemed agitated, arms crossed tightly against her chest, her lips pursed into a thin line. It wasn't long before the woman called out to her son, who was climbing the same jungle gym as Jada. "Come here, Matthew," the woman snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut through the surrounding noise. Her son hesitated for a moment, looking confused. "I said, come here, right now." Darius's smile faded. He sat up slightly, observing the woman as she pointed toward Jada with a dismissive wave, whispering something to her son. Whatever she said seemed to spur Matthew into leaving the jungle gym. Jada noticed the abrupt exit, her face falling as her playmate was whisked away. Still, she tried to shrug it off, climbing down to join a group of children near the slides. But the woman wasn't finished. She marched toward the slide area, her sharp heels clicking against the pavement, and planted herself in front of the group. Her presence cast a sudden chill over the children's playful chatter. "You," the woman said, her voice loud and accusatory, pointing a manicured finger directly at Jada. "What do you think you're doing here?" Jada froze, her playful smile evaporating into confusion. "I'm just playing," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "This isn't a place for you," the woman hissed, her words dripping with venom. "You need to leave, now." The other children looked on, some puzzled, others uneasy. Jada, too young to fully comprehend the situation, stood rooted to the spot, unsure of how to respond. Darius's stomach knotted as he watched from the bench. He could see the shift in Jada's posture, the way her shoulders slumped, her chin lowered. The joyous spark that had filled her eyes just moments ago was now extinguished, replaced by confusion and hurt. "You're making other children uncomfortable," the woman continued, her voice rising. "We don't need people like you disrupting things here." Before Jada could say anything, a security guard, an older white man with a stern expression approached the scene. His hands rested casually on his belt, a subtle display of authority. "Everything okay here?" he asked the woman, ignoring Jada entirely. "Yes," the woman replied, her tone softening slightly now that someone seemed to take her side. "This little girl is causing a disturbance. She shouldn't be here." Jada's eyes welled with tears as the security guard glanced down at her, his expression indifferent. "You heard the lady," he said flatly. "It's probably best if you leave." Jada could hardly believe what she was hearing. She had done nothing wrong. All she wanted was to play, just like any other child. But now she was being told, no, ordered to leave, simply because this woman didn't want her there. The injustice of it all was overwhelming. The tears finally spilled over as Jada turned and ran. She sprinted away from the playground, away from the accusing stares and heartless words. All she wanted was to find her father, to tell him what had happened. Darius saw her coming, tears streaming down her cheeks, her small body shaking with each sob. He was on his feet in an instant, his heart breaking as he knelt down and wrapped his arms around her. "Jada, sweetheart, what's wrong?" he asked gently, brushing a strand of hair away from her damp face. Jada buried her face in his chest, her sobs muffled against his shirt. She said I had to leave," she choked out between gasps. "She said, I don't belong here." Darius felt a surge of anger rise within him, hot and unrelenting. He knew the world could be cruel, but to see his daughter subjected to such blatant hatred, here, in a place that was supposed to be safe, was almost more than he could bear. "Who told you that?" he asked, his voice steady but low with barely contained rage. "Who made you leave?" Jada pointed toward the playground where the woman still stood with an air of self-righteous satisfaction, the security guard lingering nearby like a silent accomplice. Darius's jaw tightened as he followed his daughter's gaze. This would not stand. Not today. Not ever. He kissed the top of Jada's head, giving her a reassuring squeeze. "Stay here for a moment, sweetheart," he said softly. "Daddy's going to take care of this." With that, Darius rose to his full height, his face set with a look of grim determination. He started towards the playground, his mind already turning over the steps he needed to take, questions that needed to be asked, actions that had to be held accountable. This wasn't just about Jada. It was about justice. And Darius knew better than most that justice, once denied, demanded to be restored. Darius moved purposefully toward the playground, his mind clear and focused despite the simmering rage in his chest. He knew that confronting people in anger rarely produced meaningful change, but he couldn't let this slide. Not when his daughter had been humiliated and made to feel less than human. Jada sat on the bench, wiping her eyes and watching as her father approached the playground where the white woman stood, still smugly presiding over the space like she owned it. The security guard remained nearby, arms crossed, as if anticipating trouble but uninterested in taking action. Other parents had begun to notice the commotion, and a few of them were now watching with interest, sensing that something was about to unfold. Darius slowed his steps just enough to center himself before addressing them. He locked eyes with the security guard first, his voice calm but firm. "Can you explain to me," Darius began, "why you felt it was appropriate to tell my daughter to leave the playground?" The guard shifted his weight uneasily. "Look, I was just trying to keep things peaceful. The lady had a complaint about your kid, and I was doing my job." Darius's eyes narrowed. "Your job is to protect everyone in this park, not to enforce someone's personal prejudices." The guard stiffened slightly but didn't respond. Darius could feel the weight of the onlookers' gazes, and so could the guard. A flicker of uncertainty crossed the man's face, but the woman, sensing the challenge, stepped forward to assert herself. "She was causing a disturbance," the woman said, her voice dripping with entitlement. "This playground is for everyone's children, and we have the right to feel comfortable here. My son," she motioned toward the boy clinging to her side, "didn't feel safe playing near her. I have every right to protect him." Darius took a step closer, his expression unwavering. "Your son didn't seem uncomfortable at all until you decided he should be." The woman's face flushed with indignation. "I don't appreciate your tone," she snapped. "I'm simply looking out for my child. We don't need strangers intruding here." Darius gave her a cold, measured look. "So, what you're saying is that my daughter doesn't belong here? That because of the way she looks, she's somehow not welcome?" The woman opened her mouth, then shut it again, clearly flustered. "That's not what I said," she muttered, though her tone carried no conviction. "Then explain it to me," Darius pressed, "because the only thing my daughter did was try to play with the other children, something she has every right to do." The crowd of parents had grown. Some murmured among themselves, exchanging glances, while others stood in awkward silence. It was clear that opinions were divided. Some sympathized with Darius, while others seemed to side with the woman, whether out of agreement or discomfort with the confrontation. The guard shifted again, clearly uneasy with the public attention. "Look, sir," he said, holding up a placating hand, "let's not make this into something bigger than it is. I was just following the rules." Darius's eyes darkened. "You were following whose rules? Show me where in the park's regulations it says that children can be excluded because they make someone uncomfortable." The guard faltered, unable to answer. The truth was obvious. There were no such rules. What had happened here was not about regulations or safety. It was about prejudice, plain and simple. Darius took a step back, his voice carrying a deliberate weight. "You've humiliated my daughter in front of her peers. You've allowed this woman to dictate who gets to stay and who has to leave based on nothing but her personal bias. And you expect me to just let that go?" The guard glanced around nervously, aware that he was losing control of the situation. The woman, still defiant, crossed her arms. "If you think you can intimidate me," she said, her voice rising, "you're sadly mistaken. I have every right to protect my son from people who don't belong here." Darius tilted his head, studying her for a long moment. "You seem very comfortable deciding who belongs and who doesn't," he said quietly. "But you should know, those kinds of decisions have consequences." There was a ripple of unease in the crowd. Some parents shifted awkwardly, while others nodded in agreement with Darius's words. The tension was thick, but Darius had no intention of backing down. "You'll be hearing from me again," Darius said, addressing both the guard and the woman. "I'll be filing a formal complaint with the city administration, and I'll make sure the media knows exactly what happened here." The guard's face paled slightly. "That's not necessary." "Oh, it's very necessary," Darius interrupted smoothly. "If this park wants to uphold any standard of fairness, actions like this can't go unanswered." Several parents exchanged glances, whispering to each other. The guard looked increasingly uncomfortable under the weight of the public scrutiny. Even the woman seemed to sense that things weren't going in her favor. "Come on, Matthew," she muttered, taking her son by the arm. "Let's go." As the woman retreated, dragging her child with her, Darius watched her leave, his expression impassive. The guard remained standing awkwardly, not knowing what to do or say. Darius turned back toward the bench where Jada sat, her eyes still puffy from crying, but filled with hope now that her father had stood up for her. He gave her a reassuring smile, though his mind was already racing ahead, planning his next move. "This isn't over," he murmured to himself. "Not by a long shot." He sat down beside Jada and gently placed an arm around her shoulder. "We're going to fix this, sweetheart," he promised. "We'll make sure it never happens again." Jada looked up at him, her expression a mixture of gratitude and lingering sadness. "But what if it does happen again?" she whispered. "What if they don't listen?" "They'll listen," Darius said firmly, "because we won't let them ignore us." He pulled out his phone and opened his contacts, scrolling down to the number of a local journalist he knew. The story needed to be told, and the city needed to know that people like that woman and that guard couldn't act without consequence. As he typed out a message to the journalist, Darius felt a familiar sense of purpose settle over him. He had faced injustice before, both in his career and in life, but this was personal. He wasn't just fighting for a legal principle. He was fighting for his daughter's right to exist freely, without fear or shame. He pressed send, pocketed his phone, and gave Jada's hand a comforting squeeze. "We're going to do this the right way," he said, "step by step, and no one is going to stop us." Jada leaned against him, her small hand clutching his. For the first time since the incident, she felt a little safer, knowing that her father wouldn't let her down. Darius had seen many injustices in his years on the bench, but what happened in the park struck a different chord. This wasn't just a case to him, it was personal. As the days passed, he threw himself into ensuring that the events of that afternoon would not be swept under the rug. The same energy he used to uphold justice in the courtroom would now be focused on holding the park administration accountable, but he knew that wouldn't be easy. The following Monday, Darius sent an official complaint to the city administration. He detailed the incident in full, naming the security guard and the white woman who had targeted Jada. Along with his complaint, he included testimonies from the few parents who had witnessed the confrontation and agreed to speak out. His first stop after filing the complaint was City Hall, where he met with officials to demand an investigation. Darius knew that many such complaints often languished in bureaucratic limbo, but he was determined not to let that happen. He also contacted a local journalist, Patricia Green, whose reporting on community issues had earned her respect for tackling stories of injustice and inequality. Patricia was quick to respond, setting up a meeting with Darius at his office the next morning. As she sat across from him in his office, her notebook open and her eyes sharp, she listened attentively while he recounted the incident in the park. "This is not just about my daughter," Darius explained, his voice firm but controlled. "This is about the broader issue of how we handle public spaces, how we enforce inclusivity, or fail to do so. The guard's actions were wrong, and the administration needs to address it. But there's a deeper problem here, Patricia." Patricia nodded, jotting down notes. "You're saying this isn't an isolated incident?" Darius leaned back in his chair. "Absolutely. Incidents like these happen all the time, but they're rarely addressed because they're dismissed as small things. But these so-called small things add up. They create an environment where certain people feel entitled to dictate who belongs in a public space and who doesn't." She paused for a moment, her pen hovering over the paper. "And what do you think the administration will do?" "They'll resist," Darius said bluntly. "There's no way they'll admit fault unless they're pushed. That's why I need this to go public. I need people to know that this kind of behavior won't be tolerated." Patricia closed her notebook and met his gaze. "I'll start writing the story tonight. It'll be on the front page by the end of the week." Darius thanked her and shook her hand, but even as she left his office, a feeling of unease settled in his chest. He knew this was just the beginning of a much larger battle. Within days, the article appeared on the front page of the local paper. "Judge fights for justice after daughter targeted in public park." The headline was bold, and the article detailed not only the incident, but also the broader implications of the way public spaces were policed. Patricia didn't hold back. She highlighted the racial undertones of the confrontation, making it clear that this wasn't just a matter of playground rules, but a reflection of deeper societal issues. The article quickly gained traction online, sparking debate across social media platforms. Some rallied behind Darius, supporting his call for accountability and fairness, while others downplayed the event, accusing him of overreacting and blowing the situation out of proportion. The city administration, predictably, wasn't thrilled with the attention. Just a few days after the article's publication, Darius received a call from the city manager's office requesting a meeting to discuss the investigation. The meeting took place in a sterile conference room at City Hall. Darius sat across from a panel of officials, including the city manager, head of Parks and Recreation, and a legal representative. The atmosphere was tense from the moment he walked in. These were people used to keeping the peace with minimal conflict, and they were clearly uncomfortable with the negative attention the story had drawn. "We want to assure you, Judge Marshall," the city manager began, "that we are taking your complaint very seriously. An internal investigation is already underway, and we're interviewing the security personnel involved as well as the woman you identified in your complaint." Darius nodded, waiting for the inevitable but. "However," the city manager continued, "we believe it's important to remember that the park's rules are designed to ensure a safe and comfortable environment for all visitors. Sometimes, in the heat of the moment, misunderstandings happen. The security guard may have been trying to de-escalate the situation." Darius's eyes narrowed. "You're calling what happened to my daughter a misunderstanding? She was told she didn't belong there, and instead of defending her, your security guard sided with a woman who made that decision based on nothing more than her own prejudice. We're not denying that the incident was unfortunate." The city's legal representative cut in, his tone measured. "But we also have to balance the interests of all park visitors. The guard's job is to maintain peace, and it's possible he made a judgment call under difficult circumstances." Darius leaned forward, his voice calm but laced with steel. "The only difficult circumstance here was that my daughter was playing while black, and your guard decided that was a problem." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Darius didn't flinch, holding each of their gazes, challenging them to deny the truth. "We understand your concerns," the city manager said after a pause, her voice tight, "but we ask for your patience as we complete the investigation." "I'm not asking for patience," Darius replied coldly. "I'm asking for justice." As the investigation continued, the city faced mounting pressure from both sides. On one hand, activists and community members rallied behind Darius, demanding changes in how public spaces were managed. On the other hand, some city officials were reluctant to acknowledge the racial dynamics of the incident, fearing that it would spark a larger conversation they weren't prepared to have. Darius wasn't surprised by the resistance. The city administration, like many institutions, was slow to change. But he knew that the more attention this case received, the harder it would be for them to sweep it under the rug. So he doubled down on his efforts. He began speaking at public meetings, urging local residents to come forward with their own stories of discrimination in public spaces. He reached out to civil rights organizations who offered their support in amplifying his message. The case quickly grew beyond the playground incident. It became a focal point in the broader fight for racial equality in the city. The backlash was swift. Some residents accused Darius of trying to divide the community, claiming that his focus on race was unnecessary and harmful. The tension in the city grew palpable, with heated discussions dominating town meetings and online forums. For many, the case had become emblematic of the ongoing struggle for civil rights, a battle between those who wanted progress and those who clung to the status quo. At home, the strain was starting to show. Jida, once a carefree child, now seemed hesitant and withdrawn. She no longer asked to go to the park, and when they drove past playgrounds, she averted her eyes. One evening, as Darius tucked her into bed, Jada looked up at him with wide, sad eyes. "Daddy, why don't they like me?" The question hit him like a punch to the gut. He had been so focused on fighting the system that he hadn't stopped to think about how deeply the incident had affected her. Darius sat on the edge of the bed, taking her small hand in his. "They don't dislike you," he said gently. "Some people are just afraid of things they don't understand. But that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you, okay?" Jada nodded, though her eyes were still filled with doubt. "But what if they do it again? What if I can't play at the park anymore?" Darius felt a surge of helplessness, knowing that no matter how hard he fought, he couldn't shield her from every injustice. But he could teach her to stand tall in the face of it. "We're going to make sure that doesn't happen," he promised. "I'm going to make sure everyone knows that you belong anywhere you want to be." Jaida's face softened a little, but the sadness lingered. Darius kissed her forehead and whispered good night, but as he left the room he couldn't shake the heavy weight on his chest. This fight was about so much more than playgrounds or park rules. It was about creating a world where his daughter, and every child like her, could grow up without having to question whether they were welcome in the spaces meant for everyone. The investigation continued, but Darius knew that the outcome wasn't guaranteed. The resistance from the city officials was palpable, and the longer the process dragged on, the more it felt like they were hoping to quietly sweep the matter aside. But Darius wasn't backing down. He had faced resistance before, and this time he wasn't just fighting for a client or a case. He was fighting for his daughter, for her future, and for the justice she deserved. The tension in the city had reached its peak. Weeks of public debate, interviews, and protests had left the issue hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. The city officials could no longer ignore the pressure from the media, community leaders, and activists. It was clear that Darius's fight had struck a nerve, and the time had come for the city administration to face the consequences of their inaction. The day of the public hearing had arrived, and City Hall was packed. Local reporters lined the room, cameras ready, and a large crowd of citizens filled every available seat. The case had attracted attention from all corners of the community, and people came not only to hear the decision, but to bear witness to what had become a defining moment for the city. Darius sat in the front row with Jada beside him, holding her small hand in his. She looked up at him occasionally, her wide eyes reflecting a mixture of nervousness and hope. He squeezed her hand gently, offering silent reassurance. No matter the outcome, they had made their voices heard. But Darius knew that today was not just about being heard. It was about justice being served. The city officials, led by the mayor, entered the chamber and took their places. The mayor, an older man with a graying beard and a measured expression, called the meeting to order. The room fell into a hushed silence as he spoke. "We are here today to address the incident that occurred in our public park several weeks ago," the mayor began. "This case has sparked much debate and has raised important questions about how we manage our public spaces and ensure that all citizens are treated fairly." Darius listened closely, his eyes never leaving the mayor. The room felt charged with anticipation, every person on edge as they waited for the verdict. The mayor continued, outlining the findings of the investigation. "The security guard involved in the incident has been interviewed extensively, as have multiple witnesses. After careful consideration, it has been determined that his actions were inappropriate and violated the rights of the child involved. Effective immediately, the guard will be dismissed from his position for failure to uphold the standards expected of public employees." A ripple of reaction spread through the room. Some nodded in approval, while others exchanged whispered comments. Darius felt a surge of relief wash over him, one small victory in a much larger battle. But the mayor wasn't finished. "The woman who initiated the complaint against the child will be banned from returning to the park for a period of 1 year," the mayor added. "Her actions were found to be motivated by personal bias, which has no place in our public spaces." The decision sent another wave through the room. Darius kept his face calm, but inside he felt a weight lift. The woman who had humiliated Jada would no longer have the power to make such hurtful decisions in that park. But the mayor still had more to say. In addition to these disciplinary actions, the city will be implementing new policies to ensure that such incidents do not occur again. This includes mandatory training for all park security personnel on racial bias and inclusivity. We are also revising our policies to make it clear that no individual may be excluded from public spaces based on race, ethnicity, or any other discriminatory factor. The room buzzed with conversation as the mayor's words settled in. Darius allowed himself a small smile. It wasn't just about punishing those who had done wrong. It was about changing the system itself. The fight had been worth it, and though it wasn't the end of the struggle, it was a significant step forward. The mayor concluded the hearing with a final statement. "We recognize that this has been a difficult issue for our community, but we are committed to creating a more inclusive and welcoming environment for all residents. We appreciate Judge Darius Marshall for bringing this matter to our attention, and we thank the citizens who have engaged in this important dialogue. Let us all continue to work together to ensure that our city is a place where everyone belongs." As the room broke into applause, Darius turned to Jada, who was staring up at him with wide, hopeful eyes. "Did we win?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Darius smiled and nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, we did." Later that afternoon, Darius and Jada returned to the park. The same park that had once been the site of her humiliation was now a symbol of their victory. The playground was bustling with children, their laughter echoing in the crisp air, and the sight of it brought a sense of peace to Darius. Today was different. Today, Jada would play without fear, without limits. As they approached the playground, Jada hesitated for just a moment. Darius noticed the flicker of doubt in her eyes, the memory of what had happened here still fresh in her mind. He knelt down beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's okay, Jada," he said softly. "You belong here, just like everyone else." Jada looked at him for a moment, searching his face for reassurance. Then, with a deep breath, she stepped forward. Slowly at first, then with growing confidence, she ran toward the swings, her face lighting up as she joined the other children. Darius watched her from a distance, his heart swelling with pride. Jada was laughing again, her spirit undimmed by the ugliness of the past weeks. She soared higher and higher on the swing, her feet kicking up toward the sky, her joy as infectious as ever. But it wasn't just her laughter that filled him with pride. It was the knowledge that they had fought for something bigger than themselves, and they had won. The changes the city had made would ensure that no other child would have to face what Jada had gone through, at least not in this park. As Darius stood there, watching his daughter, a parent approached him, a white man with a nervous expression but a genuine smile. "I just wanted to say thank you," the man said, extending his hand, "for what you did. It couldn't have been easy, but it was the right thing. My kids and I come here all the time, and it's good to know that this place will be better for everyone now." Darius shook his hand, appreciating the gesture. "Thank you," he replied. "It was a long fight, but it was worth it." The man nodded before returning to his family, leaving Darius alone with his thoughts. He glanced around the park, taking in the sight of parents and children of all races playing together, unbothered by the differences that had once been used to divide them. But Darius knew this was just one battle in a much larger war. The fight for equality and justice was far from over. There were still minds to change, laws to amend, and systems to dismantle. Today was a victory, yes, but it was only a step on a much longer journey. He turned back to Jada, who was now at the top of the slide, waving excitedly at him. Darius waved back, a proud smile tugging at his lips. For now, he allowed himself to savor this moment. The road ahead might be long and difficult, but for today they had won a small but important victory. And that was something worth celebrating. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the playground, Darius felt a quiet sense of hope. Change was possible. Progress could be made. And as long as there were people willing to stand up for what was right, the world could be made better, one step at a time. Jada came running toward him, her face flushed with excitement. "Daddy, did you see me? I went so high." "I saw you, sweetheart," Darius said, scooping her up into his arms. "You were flying." As they left the park, hand in hand, Darius couldn't help but think about the future. There were still battles to fight, still injustices to confront, but as long as they faced them together, he knew they could make a difference. And for Jada, and for every child like her, that was a future worth fighting for. Thank you for being with us all the way to the end. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new stories. Click on the bell to get notifications. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out the others. There's more to come. Share your opinion in the comments and tell us where you watch us from. Subscribe or else. You'll miss new stories.